Everywhere there's a call to action for an email address, there should be a text opt-in. Your chances of reaching someone through text is 10 times greater than email.
I'm Eric Wilson, managing partner of Startup Caucus, the home of campaign tech innovation on the right. Welcome to the Business of Politics show. On this podcast, you're joining in on a conversation with entrepreneurs, operatives, and experts who make professional politics happen. This episode is all about political text messaging. Why are campaigns turning to this old school tech as a reliable method for getting out the vote and raising money? How do campaigns tap into the power of texting without becoming annoying? We're digging into all that and much more. To help us understand, we're joined by Jack Bobin, Head of Business Development and Partnerships at Tatango, an industry leader in political text messaging. Jack has spent the last 5 years helping political agencies and campaigns understand the SMS marketing landscape. Before that, he was at AT&T for nearly a decade. So I can't think of anyone better to talk to unpack all that we need to know about campaign text messaging. Jack, what are the two different types of text messaging that campaigns use, and how do they differ?
In our world of texting, there are two distinct areas of how texting occurs, and it's called P2P and A2P. P2P is known as person-to-person messaging. Technically in the industry, it's known as peer-to-peer messaging, but I always say it's person-to-person, right? And it's called P2P because it's essentially one 10-digit phone number texting another, right? It's just like you texting your friend, except you're getting a text message from a campaign. By regulation, though, just like it is when you send a text message from phone number to phone number, these systems require a push of a button to send each text message to each individual phone number. And that's important to remember because we talk about the other form of texting, and that's A2P. A2P is application to peer. If you think of it similarly like email, when you push an email and you send it to 42 people, it's one system sending a message to many, where P2P is one-to-one messaging, one message going out to a single person. You have to keep repeating that process. Application to peer, or A2P, is a text messaging application that's able to send hundreds, thousands, millions of messages at one single push of a button. But because it's so powerful, there are different guidelines and different things that happen in the P2P messaging space and the A2P messaging space. A2P messaging has a little bit more regulatory stuff around it because it's really considered more powerful, and it is a fair bit more powerful than P2P.
You're like in the HOV lane with the carriers and getting on people's text.
Yeah, you got a hall pass. I always say it's the hall pass to messaging, right? You can, when you get that hall pass, you can go up and down the hall as you please, right? Rather than the carriers or the hall monitors stopping you at the time and asking you what's going on.
I think it's important to clarify right at the start here that I always encourage campaigns to use both. Because they have their strengths, their advantages and disadvantages, which we'll dig into. But I think if people take one thing away, there is no one right text messaging type for a campaign. You need both. And so let's break down what are the advantages of A2P, what I always call it broadcast or opt-in text messaging. So what are the advantages there?
So in what we call permission-based, kind of a formal way of saying it. We all know it is opt-in, but in permission-based messaging, it's A2P is in a channel that really is able to send to people that agree to receive messaging before you send it. And there are advantages to that. The carriers open it up, so it's speed. Here at our company, Tatango, we can send 25 million messages in under an hour. That's pretty incredible. 10% of the country population in an hour. So there's speed and volume associated with A2P messaging and cost. Typically, we're 20% cheaper than P2P channels, and there's a lot of reasons why that is. But I will say the other advantage to A2P is what we call nurturing and engaging people that have agreed to receive messaging from you. So since it's permission-based, opt-in only, people who do agree to receive text messages from a campaign or a PAC are usually more valuable as donors and long-term supporters of campaigns. So A2P is nurturing and donor value. We can see upwards of $5 to $1 spent on the ROI. P2P is more of that adrenaline shot, and here's why. In P2P, you're able to upload a list of voters. You don't need permission. And that's the big difference between the two. And so if you're a campaign, you're trying to get the vote out 48 hours before an election, you don't have time to get someone's permission and opt-in and everything else. You're just going to upload a list of phone numbers and have a button pusher just jamming those messages out. There's no permission needed before you send a message. Now, the advantages and disadvantages actually mirror each other. And here's why. You can load up 750,000 people in your congressional district and hit every one of them, whether they support you or not. You kind of alienate people. And you know, politicians who are decidedly left or right, a red household getting a message from an extremely blue candidate, that's not going to go over well. So and moderates too, right? If you got somebody on the edge and you're spamming them or you're hitting them hard with unsolicited, non-opted in messages, that can be a disadvantage as well. The last thing on the P2P is it's pretty expensive. You have to hit that send button every time you send a single message to a single person, right? So we have these things called button pushers. Sounds like an old term. They're a little bit more expensive, but the advantages of it is upload your list and send. And so with A2P, it's cheaper, right? A little more powerful volume there, but you got to get that engagement and that permission. So you're spot on, Eric, when you say there are needs for both. I always say P2P is that adrenaline shot. You go get those numbers, get out the vote. And then those long-term, valuable grassroots and high-dollar donors, let's work on A2P with those folks.
And I think in the disadvantage column of A2P opt-in permission-based texting is that you do have to get a short code with the carriers. This is a 6-digit number that campaigns have to apply for, and that can take some time, right?
Yeah, it does. And, it's funny. This industry has been around, the short code industry and this kind of permission-based texting has been around for 20 years.
Right. And
the carriers have never improved their approval time. Now, at Tatango, we have a great team here, and it takes us, we when we engage with the campaign and we submit the paperwork to get approvals with the carriers, AT&T and those guys, it takes us 3.5, 4 weeks on average. But we've heard of companies that are 4 and 6 months, and I won't get into it, but there's reasons why. But yeah, you got to go get your approval to use that HOV lane. That's a perfect example. You need a license plate for your car, check, and you need an HOV pass, check, and that's really where you see A2P messaging reside.
So aside from getting subscribers from peer-to-peer texting, what are some other strategies that campaigns use to grow their permission-based texting list?
Right. Yeah, this is a great question. It happens with every client of ours is what are the best strategies here? And so we start with integrations. The environment, political environment thrives on data and data use and data aggregation. And so we first fit into that with the A2P platforms need to integrate with donation page solutions, right? ActBlue, WinRed, Anodot are all the bigger players. And we have integrations for those. We're nonpartisan. And, but that's super important, right? When someone gives a donation, you want to capture that data for merge tags and donation data and things and be able to move that around. That's the expectation of clients today and political agencies is that you're good at handling data. And so we get an opt-in from donation pages. That's a big one for us. And tying into this data set and donors would really boost opt-in and fundraising dramatically. If you don't do that, it can be a bit of a struggle. So donation integration, donation platform integration is big for us. The second one I wanted to mention here was you need to sprinkle that opt-in, that call to action, the opt-in, however form it takes, as many places as possible. We see a lot of reticence, like, this, Eric, political campaigns are so singular in driving people to the donation page. Right. I got to tell you, it drives me crazy sometimes because it's part of their DNA. They can't help it. It's like we have this great platform and you can throw in links and you can track links and everything else, but it always rolls down to the donation page, right? So what's wrong with a website pop-up, right? With an opt-in phone number blank, or we have click to join URL links. Put those wherever there is a supporter that's digital, right? If they're in their email, there should be a click to join link. If they're on their Twitter page, maybe a post with a click to join link for text. You throw that up in Twitter. So, Twitter, YouTube, everywhere there's a call to action for an email address. This is my mantra this year. Everywhere there's a call to action for an email address, there should be a text opt-in.
Right.
Your chances of reaching someone through text is 10 times greater than email. So my question to everybody is like, well, you got your email address like call to action sprinkled everywhere, but it's 10 times greater possibility that you can reach them by text. So,
and in recent memory, the Trump campaign in 2020 was really good at driving their text message. I mean, everyone who worked on the Trump campaign changed their Twitter name to text Trump to 88022, right? I still remember the shortcut.
Yeah.
And it was on every placard at every one of his rallies. If you wanted tickets, you had to opt in for text messages. And that is, when it becomes your primary focus, it is everywhere, to your point. And,
it should be.
I think having it everywhere, having it worked in, but then also like the live candidate call outs, it is the perfect call to action from, a speech. So when a candidate has, you're visiting a local, county party or something like that.
Yeah.
It's simply a matter of saying, hey, and I need you on my team. That's why you've got to text join to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? That's And so it really is, from a marketing perspective, this top of funnel, right? Where everyone wants them to be at the bottom of the funnel, which is a donation, but we've got work to do to get them there.
Yeah, and it helps to divide. And I'll just leave the opt-in strategy like this. You've got to think analog and digital, right? So analog, I call these analog call to actions. They're on podiums, like you said. They're on the bus, right? If you're a localized congressional candidate, you're out and about, right? They're at the town hall on a banner. You've got to think of guerrilla marketing with respect to your analog call to action. And
it's a great way to bridge offline with online.
Right. And then your digital call to action, let's get your URL click to join links and let's work this digitally, right? And so in order for texting programs to really pop, you've got to think, am I approaching this with analog call to action and digital call to action? That's kind of how I think of it.
Okay, so now that we've grown our list with some of these strategies, how do you get subscribers to take action, whether that's donate, whether that's get out the vote? What are some tips that we need to know there?
Yeah, I think we're all humans, right? And we all love interaction. And so I think that the last cycle, we didn't do a lot of that in texting. I think it was, we all got the text right. Donate now, blood on their hands, this kind of stuff, emotional messaging, right? And I think this is really putting the voice of the voter. It needs to happen and getting subscribers to take action. And so I talk about it really being about drawing them into engagement with issues that matter to them. And also using like news cycle and current events. It's, remembering the people you're reaching out to have already agreed to hear from you. So you don't need to convince them to be interested in you. So let's take that conversation further to get them to take action, right? And thank them for joining and thank them for being engaged. And so communicating with them in their voice will move them to take action. It's got to be thoughtful. And we talk about using tools, segmentation to specifically target people. If someone gave last week, what's your targeting strategy now? Are you going to, if they gave $250 last week, are you going to hit them for 300? Or are you going to pause on sending them even another donation message or send them a thank you message? A lot of people leave these programs when they give money and they never hear back. So getting subscribers to take action, looking at this cycle, is going to be more personal, and it's going to involve kind of the voice of the voter in getting them to take action. They're no longer going to respond to these kind of emotional call outs. I
totally agree. The name of the game is personalization, because that is the only way you're going to stand out from the barrage of text messages that people receive. And we've got to get back to this concept of a conversion funnel. This is not a direct mouth to stomach situation. You've
Correct.
got to work it through the process. You're listening to the Business of Politics show. I'm speaking with Jack Bobin from Tatango about the world of political text messaging. So, Jack, RoboKiller, the call blocking service, reported that more than 15 billion political, that's billion with a B,
Yeah.
billion political texts, 15 billion political texts were sent in 2022. That works out to about 50 messages for every phone in the country. What does that, I mean, it's oversaturation. We can call it that.
Yeah. For sure.
What impact does that have on the effectiveness of SMS marketing?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting in that messaging is personal. And when we talk about what impact, what I call the cycle, last cycle was the cycle of texting. And I was giving this example the other day. If you get a political mail piece, you can just throw it away. You just throw it away like you throw everything else away. If you get a phone call, it might get through and you can hang up, et cetera, et cetera. You see a political ad on TV, who cares? But when you get a political message in your text inbox, that's personal. That's where you communicate with friends, family, and other important communication that takes place. And this oversaturation really hit people personally, right? They're at dinner and they're getting a message. They never asked for it. And so I think what you see in some of the articles from like Axios and Political mentioning all this, I think those are spot on. I think it's caused some distrust in the political texting in general. I mean, go ask anybody, go ask your friends, like, yeah, you've been getting those messages. People will just be like, oh man, I hate it. So it's so personal that it's going to take a bit to get it back. And I think that the last cycle just took things a little too far. And look, you and I have been in this political game for a long time. I understand that emotional texts test well, right? We have A/B testing. We see like, oh, that emotional text tests better. But in the long term, repeated emotional texts, I don't think test better. I think the long-term barrage of this kind of emotional text can really burn the base out. Now, I'm not placing the blame on P2P, but a lot of that comes from these unsolicited texts on that side of this equation, right? I think they have to do some work, and I think that overall these campaigns and big PACs and organizations really need to step out there and take a chance, because this needs to be, I keep calling it the voice of the voter. We need to reach people where they exist and how they want to be heard, not the way we want to do it, generating, fundraising revenue,
Yeah, I think the big lesson that campaigners should take away from 2022 is that if your marketing, your digital messaging is so generic that if it didn't have your logo on it, if you didn't have your paid for on it, it could come from any other Republican. That's when people start to tune you out, right? That tactical stuff of urgent deadline, matching, what have you, that works when you have a brand, you have a relationship, the voter knows who you are. That cannot be where you start the conversation. Right. And so number one is sending again, we need to use those tactics, but only after there have been some steps on that conversion funnel taken care of. And then the other thing is campaigns need to focus on building up their opt-in list, because if you are confronted with the cost of doing a peer-to-peer text message, you're going to try and make it about raising money, as opposed to, we're going to do a series of 3 messages that cost the same, and 2 of them are about a survey or personalization or something like that.
Right. Right. I mean, A to P list should be your golden list. You should be going to that and nurturing, right? The word we've been using around here a lot is journey. And it's about the journey. If you're going to treat your A to P people who want to hear from you, we've got to take them a little bit on a journey. It can't just be, a single message that people ignore. That, by the way, that opt-in, you spent a lot of time and money getting them to opt in. And
I mean, that's probably worth like $25, $50.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So don't treat it like, P2P is different, right? So don't apply the same tactics and everything that you do. These are people that want to hear from you. You need to nurture that and bring them along on a journey. It's early in this cycle. People should be using A to P in that way. And if you got an elected person in office, well, I haven't talked about franking, but I'm just saying, like, nurture your A to P audience, man. I mean, that's very, very important.
So, Jack, I know that we had some new regulations like 10DLC, campaign registry, things like that. What do campaigns need to be aware of in terms of making sure that they're in compliance and are working with reputable vendors?
Sure. So in the P2P space, it used to be kind of in the shadows. It was kind of like, is this okay to do? And a couple of years ago, they created a process where P2P can exist. And there's some guidelines around it. And that is called the campaign registry. So if you want to do P2P messaging, or you want to do messaging using a 10-digit number to send texts, you'll go get approval through the campaign registry. And if you want to do short codes, it goes through a slightly different process. It ends up at the carriers, AT&T and those guys, for approval anyway. And so these two kind of processes should be well known to any vendor you use. If you're going to a vendor and you're not getting confident answers on, what the approval process is for your political program, you just got to run. And I would say that the explosion of P2P vendors, once the campaign registry, it came out of the shadows, right? It came into the sunlight, and everybody's like, oh, we can do this. We can upload lists and sends all day long. So we'll do this too, right? So you had all these young companies out there, and they're all eating each other and lowering prices, and a few of them gone by the wayside. But just know that you should be, politics is full of regulation for all kinds of things, donations and election rules and regulations. And so you guys are all familiar with, what it sounds like when someone's competent in the regulatory stuff. And so you should just be asking them the questions about, are you compliant? Is your system compliant? Do you have a compliance team? If you talk to somebody, then they don't have a compliance team for political text messaging, then I would go find somebody that does.
Yeah, and that is a huge risk to a campaign or organization. If you've got this piece of critical infrastructure, whether that's your A to P or P2P system, you don't want it getting shut down in the final hours of get out the vote for a campaign. Jack, where is text messaging going? It feels like a crazy question to ask, because it is texting is a 30-year-old plus technology, but still really important today as all the platforms fracture. But are we seeing anything, new developments, new opportunities there? What's on the horizon?
Yeah, I think, we've all been familiar with, for tied in, we're familiar with like Chat GPT and other kind of crazy, powerful AI stuff. And I think that might filter into texting, to be honest with you. I can't share too much here, but I think in the flavor of personalization and back and forth interactions, we've been very limited in that. And partly because of the campaigns of just, donation, but partly because you can't, someone sitting at a computer that's sending out these texts, they're not going to be replying back to anybody. And so I would say that industry has struggled with conversational texting. It's always been this like panacea for all of us. Like, oh, people want to go back and forth with the campaign, and it's
easier said than done.
Easier said than done. So I think that AI is going to play a role in this. I think you have to be careful with responding back with AI tools and sentiment-based tools, because it's a fine line between feeling connected to a campaign and a real person and finding out it's a robot. And I think that there's a lot of data out there that is cautious, but I think if anybody does this, it's going to be political, right? I think political is going to be like, you're going to see somebody like, oh yeah, we're going to use sentiment, AI responders, to boost fundraising or whatever. So I think AI is going to play, and there's a couple of other areas I think where we're all going to advance, and it's really not as much the texting outbound as what we do in data sharing, right? And we know that political and data sharing go hand in hand, and it's so funny. Like, we've seen commercial tools trying to be applied into political, and very powerful commercial tools are struggling in our industry. It's how compressed data schedules are and how pressed election cycles are. And so data sharing and aggregation and how like Tatango feeds into that and how we can help teams. Because if you got a phone number and somebody replying back and someone that's hit the WinRed page with a link click, those are very key data points for campaigns. And so data sharing and aggregation and how we feed data aggregation platforms is going to be really important for us. And then I think the last thing, we're starting to see what you just mentioned a while ago is this personalization. I think we can combine with other solutions where we can engage with text and then go out with a personalized solution. Like Speak For is something I think is going to do really well.
Yeah, we've had Joe Mansour on the podcast, folks.
Yeah,
and listen to that episode.
And I would love to do something with Speak For where we engage somebody at a grassroots, level, and then move them on to a Speak For, client or like web page and things like that. And so I think that tools that we can integrate with and include in Tatango's platform that helps put the power back in the hands of the voters, right? So you kind of flip this equation around completely. Is that going to happen before 2024? I mean, I think it needs to happen as soon as possible, this personalization. And
well, I was going to say artificial intelligence copywriting might be an improvement over the copy that we see in most text messaging.
Oh my gosh. And I would think it would be interesting to see what a journey would look like back and forth with someone who is agreeable to a candidate and not agreeable. And because we get those too, right? And it would be interesting just to see how we would shuttle along a person to maybe be a volunteer, right? After 5 messages back and forth. So, and others, and things like shuttling them over to, a poll or things like that. So I think that adding to text solutions within a platform like a poll builder or, something like that, tied on, because we're hearing more and more that I don't want to leave my current system to go do something else. And all of the political campaigns are using all these different tools. They're using Snowflake and using Salesforce or Iterbol, and they're using us for texting and MailChimp. And at some point, there needs to be some combination of capability in single tools, but and we've talked about this before, Eric, and I think if we can combine several tools into what we do, valuable tools, tools that matter, then that'll enhance texting as well.
Well, Jack, I want to thank you for a great conversation. You can learn more about Jack and his work at Tatango with the link in our show notes. If this episode made you a little bit smarter or gave you something new to think about, maybe you learned about political texting for the first time, all we ask is that you share it with a friend or colleague. The bonus, of course, is that you look smarter in that process. Remember to subscribe to the Business of Politics show wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. You can also sign up for email updates now at businessofpoliticspodcast.com. See all the episodes, get transcripts, all of that is at that website. With that, I'll say thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.